The story of the opera in 30 seconds. Orpheus loses his wife Eurydice. He is so grief-stricken, he pleads with the gods to bring her back. They agree that she can come back as long as he goes to hell to collect her himself, on the condition that as he brings her out of hell, he's not allowed to look back at her. When he finds her, she gets upset that he's not looking at her. He ultimately turns round, sees her, she dies again. That is the basic story. It's a very enduring myth. The director's role in opera is, or it's manifold, is that from originally coming up with the ideas for the production, working with the designer, the choreographer, the whole pre-production, you know, we come up with what you see on stage and how the piece is interpreted. And then through the rehearsals with the singers, we bring that to life. And then the final stages is working with the lighting designer and the technical teams to make the show a complete evening. Goes there. So his journey into the underworld is into all the backstage areas of the theatre, which quite often can be like hell. One of the overall concepts for this production was to keep the piece in its period. So we are roughly in the late 18th century. We've set it wholly in a Baroque theatre, so it has a lot of theatrical references from theatre of the time. One of the reasons for that being Orpheus is a poet, a musician, a singer. He's an artist, and I wanted him to be in an artistic environment, because with the death of his wife, he loses his art, his inspiration. Nothing else matters. And so I wanted to see his emotional collapse represented in the world in which he inhabits. The other thing with that is, because it is a classical story, the roots of theatre come from ancient Greece, and there are lots of references throughout the production to that also. So it keeps a connection all the way through, from the original classics through an 18th century interpretation, and then with what we're doing with it, looking at it through modern eyes. There's always been a great dance content in Orpheus and Eurydice. There are ballets and dance movements written into the very fabric of the piece. When it was originally done in Vienna in 1762, there were a number of dancers, you know, choreography featured very heavily. But in the tradition of dance, that it wouldn't necessarily move the narrative on, which is where I think we differ with what we're doing. We're really moving, we're using the dance to tell the story. You know, there's not a single moment where suddenly the dance happens in isolation, which sometimes you expect, or sometimes you would have seen in Baroque pieces of the time. So we're using it as very much as a narrative device to tell the story of Orpheus and his journey through the underworld, but also there is a celebratory ballet at the end of the opera, which sometimes gets cut, but we're more or less keeping it whole, and that enables us to revisit themes and events from earlier in the opera, but looking at them through a different pair of eyes.
The role of a choreographer in an opera is to create all the movement and dance material, and to collaborate with the director and the designer towards realizing the overall vision for the production.
For the ballet at the end, we're given the music, we're not given any particular story to tell. So Arthur and I and Adrian Limford, our designer, we sat down together. We had many meetings where we talked about what the story was that we wanted to tell, what we felt the music was telling us, whether the story that we wanted to tell fitted with the music that was there, which fortunately it did. And so we plan all the way through, constantly coming back to the storytelling as a touchstone of, is this going in the place that we want it to go? So we talk about movement language and possibilities, and then so we have a framework, and then Arthur has been building on that framework in the last few days, since the beginning of rehearsals.
The dancers contribute a lot. I mean, in my process when I work with dancers, I work in a very much devised way of making material. I work very closely with the dancers in terms of giving them a feeling and what needs to happen in the scene or what needs to be portrayed and what the audience needs to know. And then together we start creating material, and then I start looking at the score and putting it to counts and moulding all of the movement and dance together.
Well, dancing in an opera is it's a unique aesthetic opera, so when you approach it with dance, you have to match the energy that is opera, which is often larger than life and full of these grandiose themes, epic sort of characterizations. So when you come into the opera, I think as a dancer you realize, oh, I need to sort of take it up a notch. Every opera I've done has been different, so that's interesting, but I'd say this time Arthur works sort of collaboratively. So, and because this opera hasn't been staged, this is the first time it's been staged as far as I know here, everything is original. So, and that's often the case with concert dance, is a choreographer will come in and say, I'm thinking of this idea, and could you maybe help me create some phrases with that in mind? And then he reviews what we've done and he sort of shapes it. And I'd say that's the way that this is going. And it's really fun because you feel like you get to have a voice.
The expectations that I have on dancers when I meet them is often that they should be ready to warm up or ready to go through a process. So often we'll get together in the morning, we'll do a little bit of a warm-up together, we'll maybe do some improvisation or something to get into the mood of the piece. And then we'll start to, I do a lot of task-based work, so I'll start setting some tasks, and then we'll start to come together and mold the material. So what I really expect of them is, I think it's really just an open spirit, is what I really love in a dancer. So when they come in and they're just open to anything that's possible. I think if there's resistance, then it's difficult. And these dancers they're just completely fantastic, beautiful dancers and very open-spirited and very used to making devised work and task-based work and being in a process.
All lifting Eddie above our heads and doing dips and snaking around the space, using Eddie's body and Eddie being the head of the snake. What do you think of that?
That's great, but in this production the dancers have many roles. So they will join the chorus in the opening scene, which is Eurydice's funeral. And then their big chunk, well, they have two big chunks. So the second big chunk would be when the women are the Furies and the men become these mad, protecting feral animals, and they attach to some kind of cords that will move, which is to protect Orpheus from entering into Hades. Then we have Dance of the Blessed Spirits, which is quite a famous dance, and it's this heavenly place where there's a lot of movement material, and the various spirits are coming down from the skies, and they're being masked by a Mother Death character, which involves a lot of movement, and the chorus will join them in on that. And the third bit is the ballet at the end, which is really quite a fun, almost a spoof on what the audience had seen before in the actual opera, but with a different twist at the end. And we're making a little point at the end, which is something that Lee, the director, felt about the character of Orpheus, and he wanted to just add a little bite in at the end, which is really great actually. So I won't tell you what it is, but it's exciting.